I know we are running short on time, and we want to spend the bulk of our time on the recommendations, recognizing that many of you have been involved throughout the process. I'm going to skip through the kind of how we got to this point very quickly, and then we'll turn it over to the rest of the team to walk us through. Before I hand it over to them, I will just stress that these are recommendations, ideas that we recognize are going to need some further vetting, but we're excited to present the outcome of our year-long fellowship with you today. So I'll jump right into kind of how we got to our land use challenges. The mayor mentioned we started out this year kind of narrowly focused on a few key publicly owned sites, but recognized really quickly that there was an opportunity to kind of zoom out to a 30,000-foot view and take a look at some of the city policies that kind of govern land use decisions and the impact that they have, particularly around issues of equity. So we've all been the beneficiary of billions of dollars of development over the past few decades, but we also know that that progress has not been shared equally by all members of the city, and so we felt that there was a real opportunity to address that. The Rose Center was instrumental in putting together our panelists. A number of you met at least some of those folks, experts from around the country, to help come to the city and kind of give us an overview of what they saw and observed. This is them trying to imitate the Calder statue up front. So when they were here back in March of this year, we took them on a tour throughout the city with stops at Link, also over on the west side. Brought them in or had some focus group discussions with representatives from a variety of organizations throughout the community that have influence within the development process. And then that trip culminated in a presentation in these chambers, which I hope and believe a number of you were able to attend. For anyone that wasn't able to get there, that video is online. And they gave us a number of insights, particularly around the recognition within the city that everyone recognizes there are inequalities that exist, but we may not necessarily have clear definitions or agreement on how to move those forward. On the issue of incentives, we recognize that the land disposition process is important in driving some of these goals, but in many cases the incentives are used as an entitlement, and so we may not be getting or may not be receiving the full benefit of the real estate activity. And these were the implementation ideas that they also touched upon, those 5. But coming out of their first trip to Grand Rapids, they gave us a little bit of homework to follow up on and really wanted to make sure that we were continuing to narrow down our focus to that idea that if everything is important, then nothing's important. And so they really challenged us to come up with 3 key priorities. So we did a follow-up survey with participants. We also looked at some of the things that are currently happening in the city. We wanted to make sure that we were recognizing the good work that already happens on some of these issues, and not just focused on where we were falling short. And then one of the real challenges they put forth with us was to take action immediately, and so we were able to, on the heels of that initial presentation, embed some of these ideas into the 201 market process. So we were able to expand the steering committee to bring in some new voices to that process, and then also change the evaluation criteria, which I think was a benefit. And then in September, so just 2 months ago, we brought our panelists back to really focus on our 3 priority areas that were identified through that follow-up survey, so issues of mobility, housing, and workforce development, for some really pointed discussions and conversations, again with a broad range of community representatives, and the ideas that emerged from that process and communication are what kind of built into these recommendations that the team are now going to walk you through.
That was impressive.
That was a year. That was a year of work.
Wow. Well done.
All right, so Mayor and Commissioners, we have a memo for you that will indicate all of the detail behind each of these recommendations. And included in the memo are recommended implementation leads, or where these recommendations could be continued or conversations could be continued. The first recommendation is a policy recommendation about the use of incentives and targeting them for geographic use. And specifically, this talks about areas of under or disinvestment that the city has experienced over the past decades, and the need to support a growth strategy along transit corridors. And so aligning the use of incentives to achieve city's equitable economic development outcomes in specific areas of the city. That doesn't mean that we don't use incentives in other areas of the city, but how do we use them to leverage investment in areas of disinvestment that we've seen? Also, we recommended that that these policy changes be incorporated into an economic development plan and strategy so that we can actually have a vision for what we think economic or equitable economic development looks like for the city and have an encompassing plan that we actually work on. I think we have a lot of great initiatives underway, but there is really no cohesive strategy that staff is really tasked with pursuing. The second is Josh. We're going to
pivot back and forth. So the second one is really talking about, so just as we mentioned, where we're targeting the use of those public incentives, it's actually talking about how we can actually develop a vision for transportation, so much like the cohesive narrative that is somewhat lacking related to economic development, for equitable development. There's a similar thing related to transportation. So the common theme throughout the first site visits, the second site visits, and a lot of the conversations related to development is mobility. So a big piece of that is really looking to adopt a people-first priority, which many of the recommendations that came forward today related to pedestrian safety are a step in that very direction, as well as a lot of the efforts with vital streets and some of those pieces, but just an overall narrative that ties that vision through all of the different planning processes that have been undertaken. But then really specifically, in going through recently in the transformation plan and the sustainability plan, tying all the different things for performance metrics for how we're measuring whether or not we're being successful related to transportation and what we mean by that. Like, what is the vision for the city related to transportation? And then the last one is, this is coming up in a number of different processes, whether it's the website redesign for services, is really addressing the internal city structure for how we deliver transportation services. From a customer experience outside, whether it's the development community or whether it's the neighborhood, it's where do you go in order to get all of your questions and your services answered. We know internally, but externally it's very difficult for the development community and for the citizens themselves to navigate that structure. So another piece, just kind of piggybacking on how Kara had mentioned, how we were talking about where we prioritize for use of public incentives. It's really prioritizing the eligible activities themselves. So there's a lot more detail in your memo about talking into that, but if you look at this little pie chart, it talks about where we were pre-2015, where we currently are in terms of where the majority of resources. So the largest eligible activity currently, mostly because of the brownfield, is surface or structured parking, with the rest going to site prep and then a little bit to some of the code requirements. We're proposing that we invert that and we focus on the people-first strategy and a lot of the lower-cost public infrastructure that helps support other investments in transportation, pedestrian accessibility, biking, travel demand management, and other car light supportive activities like car share program that we're working actively on, but really trying to just invert the way in which we prioritize the use of those resources, and not saying that parking isn't important and it still will be a large eligible activity, but really trying to say that the first elements we're trying to support are the transportation elements that are much more supportive for some of the equity challenges, because reducing the cost of transportation, it's the second highest cost that a household has next to housing. So any way in which we can try to reduce those costs is really critically important in moving forward.
So the next recommendation is related to the disposition of publicly owned land. And with the creation of the Affordable Housing Fund, we thought of ideas and collected information from other communities that they too have efforts to capitalize financial resources to be available for affordable housing investment in the city. So one of the recommendations here is in the event of a city-owned property disposition, that the City Commission dedicate a certain percentage of those proceeds toward affordable housing that could be developed within our neighborhoods. So that would provide us the assets to have a proactive role in securing land in geographically prioritized areas to support affordable housing. In addition, we can also use the funds to also secure housing sites where we also have transit, so making sure that those housing investments occur where people have access to affordable transit. This one's me too. This is another policy recommendation to ensure more micro-local business enterprise participation, building off the success from Vital Streets and trying to establish increasing requirements for the participation in projects receiving municipal incentives. We can ask that we determine from the development community what's possible and how do we encourage them to stretch their goals as it relates to investing in local business enterprises.
Thank you, Kara. So I'm going to take the next three. And so the first one is the establishment of something that we're calling a chief participation officer. And this could be a position that the city commission could even amend the city charter to make it a commission appointed position. But this really reflects what we heard throughout the process, and this is no secret around Grand Rapids, is that there are many opportunities to improve the way City Hall, other public agencies interface with citizens. We generally refer to that as engagement. And one of the deficiencies that we saw was that there are so many different tentacles of City Hall, so many different departments that reach out into the community, and they're managing very different kinds of processes. And so there's not a lot of uniformity or clarity as it relates to expectations. So the idea is that the recommendation is that you could create a position that sort of serves like a city clerk or even a city engineer, where Darlene has the responsibility of certifying an election. You would have a position that certifies the engagement strategy for every plan or process or really moment where citizens are going to be involved in helping to provide recommendations that would shape a process. And that would be a position then would work with all of the city departments as well as the development community to create that clarity of process, which is absolutely critical. And then secondly, thinking about this as a twofold strategy to improve engagement. And this is, again, not a new idea. This is an idea that was recommended on page 176 of GR Forward, but is also one that is currently being pursued by Stacy Soudan, the city manager's office, is about this idea of a citizen learning institute that could really help to equip citizens and educate them about the development process and how City Hall and development processes work and how they can be involved. So really it's an empowerment tool to help to really normalize, I think, the quality and preparedness of different neighborhood and business associations to be able to really provide development community as well as yourselves with instrumental, really recommendations that can help to improve development projects to shape neighborhoods. And lastly, and this is something that I think goes without saying, all development projects in Grand Rapids, or I should say most, involve the layering of incentives, both local incentives as well as state incentives. And so some of the recommendations that we've offered this morning would involve really working with MSHDA as well as the MEDC to amend the way that they administer their own programs. So if we're wanting to, as an example, shift the prioritization for things like brownfield eligibility into distressed neighborhoods, we'd want to make sure that CRP was there as well, that CRP would be a tool that could be accessed by the development community in the same way that it's currently only eligible in the general downtown area. The same is said at MSHDA with the QAP, and making sure that the rules and regulations that it's using to review the eligibility of affordable housing projects coincide with the city's goals. And in some cases, what we have is affordable housing that gets clustered in areas like downtown, so we have an oversaturation of affordable housing, and that's because mechanisms that MSHDA uses to rate those applications inherently rank highly those applications that have a high walk score. But that is out of alignment with the city's own community development plan, which proposes a scattered site approach. The map that we showed earlier shows some of those target areas where you want to encourage affordable housing. So the financial mechanism that we recommended is a means for the city to play a proactive role in acquiring those sites, but then you have to work with MSHDA to make sure that its own evaluation process can help to really balance and accelerate the city's process of trying to achieve its affordable housing goals. So many of these ideas that we've recommended this morning, these don't cost any money. These are mechanisms that would really just change the policy or the procedure by which you are reviewing applications or administering your own tools. And so they are ideas, each of which probably needs to be vetted further and discussed and really determined its level of appropriateness. But it is ones that we think that we've made recommendation in the memo of different places for those those the successive conversations to occur. Again, those are just our recommendations for where we see next steps. We think the timing is very good, given the fact that you are initiating your own budget process to determine what some of your priorities are. So some of these things, like potentially establishing a new position, obviously has budgetary implications, and those are priorities that you'll have to set for yourself. Just three more things I want to mention is that all of the resources associated with the Daniel Rose Fellowship and our journey as a team are available on Downtown Grand Rapids Inc.'s website, so at downtowngr.org. Everything from the original problem statement to the memo that you have today to today's presentation, all of those materials are there, as well as the synthesis of public input that we use to help to shape the policy recommendations that we've offered. And I certainly want to acknowledge many of the folks that are in the audience today, including many of the DGRI board members, alliance members, and our own staff that have been supportive of this journey. And then lastly, the mayor for her appointment for this great opportunity, not only for myself, but on behalf of the other members of the fellowship team. I think it's been a challenging experience to rethink the way we utilize our own tools, how to turn a screwdriver into a hammer. But understanding that we wanted to affect different outcomes, we think we need to try to do things differently. And so these recommendations are different ideas that you can choose to adopt, accelerate, throw out the window. Really, it's up to you. But we do think that this is a comprehensive set of recommendations that would help to affect more equitable outcomes through the development process. So with that, I'd like to say thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. I'm going to turn it over for questions or comments from my colleagues. Commissioner?
I actually just want to make a quick comment. First, thank you to everyone who participated in this and providing us with this document to read through. But I want to pause for a moment and just thank Chris for his fingerprint being on our city. We appreciate all of the work that you've done here. And thank you for your service, thank you for your dedication, and thank you for your vision. And I think we will be forever changed for the better because of your presence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Well said. Commissioner?
Very, very quick comment. I had a chance to meet with some of the folks and get a kind of precursor to this, so I'm a little further ahead. Some of these recommendations, if you understand the ramifications of them, could be quite controversial, which is a good thing. I've quoted this several times in the first presentation for the Rose Fellowship. They'll say, we know we're really starting to achieve equity is when the city starts to say no to certain projects. And part of what the implications of what they're saying is might have a few more no's in the downtown core, which creates yeses out in the neighborhoods, and that's controversial. So, and I think some of these recommendations, if they're turned into policy, could actually take what we're talking about in the affordable housing and the housing conversation and take it to a whole nother level. So I hope these don't just sit here as recommendations, they don't go anywhere, but they get some legs.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner?
Yeah, to that end, thanks to the group. I think to what you said, there's a lot of ideas that are in here. I think that some of those we may even want to talk through and have asked the manager to add to our agenda, because I think that even though they're policy recommendations now, we've even have layered some of these on to the initial 2-1 market analysis too. So I think we do need to be thoughtful about how we're moving down that and probably have a good discussion overall, because to your point, the market will change. The market hasn't reacted in this way yet, and so it's all unknown whether or not how it will or won't react. So in that sense, that's what I really want to talk about more. And there's a lot here, and Chris, I appreciate you putting it all online, because I've read some of that stuff, and I think there's more to dive into here. And some of this stuff is probably going to have to be trial period too, because we don't know yet, right, what it'll do. So thanks.
Thank you. And so, commissioners, there are in the memo, you'll see there's recommended leads. Mm-hmm. So some of these items I am going to ask Kara to take on over to Economic Development Project Team. Some of them will go to Mobile GR, where we already have a team of individuals that can start to vet this out a little bit more. And then some of the other ones, we'll have to talk about as a body, and we can follow up in a work session. So again, these are these are learnings over, as you said, a year-long journey. I want to thank the four of you. I can tell you they have put a lot of time and energy into this. I was able to see a little bit of it, but I only saw a small fraction of the work that they did in partnership with the other three cities. I think it was a tremendous learning opportunity. Connections were made, but also to have the opportunity to work with experts throughout our country through the Urban Land Institute, I think was a real gift. And again, challenges us to think differently. So thank you all. Thank you for the presentation. I'm sure there will be follow-up questions. If there are, commissioners, any of you can reach out to any of the four, at least for a little bit longer. We can reach out to Chris. And we can follow up, and then we'll go through and we'll have pieces of this, as I said, moved over to Mobile GR, or Economic Development Project Team. All right, any final thoughts or questions?
Say goodbye to Chris. We so appreciate all that you've done in this 5.5 years. You worked at the speed of light, and that's a difficult thing to do when you're working with government. And thank all of you for your work with this project.
Yeah, thank you. Nice job. Thank you for the presentation.